Have you ever, walked into a store to buy an umbrella right before a massive storm, only to find the shelves completely bare?
Oh, yeah, just those empty wire racks.
Right, just mocking you while the rain pours down outside. Or, well, on the flip side, think about wandering through a massive big box store in the middle of July.
Sweating in your shorts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're desperate for the air conditioning, and you look over to see half the floor packed to the rafters with heavy winter coats.
Yeah, it feels like a glitch in the Matrix, doesn't it? Like someone somewhere made a colossal mistake.
It really does.
Because, we like to imagine commerce as this perfectly rational, fluid system. Like supply just naturally appears to meet our demand.
Like magic.
Right. But when you see those empty umbrella racks or those out-of-season coats taking up an entire aisle, you're actually witnessing the visible failure of a massive invisible machine.
And today, we are going to expose that invisible machinery. We are looking at the system that tries to predict your behavior, your buying habits, and your deepest consumer needs, often before you even realize you have them.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So the mission of this deep dive today is to completely demystify demand forecasting. We are going to figure out how logistics professionals balance what you and I want with what they can, actually physically supply.
It is a high wire balancing act, for sure. And to understand the mechanics of it, we are pulling our insights today from a really highly specialized source.
Yeah, the APCS CLTD manual.
Right. It's a comprehensive certification manual for supply chain and logistics professionals. It stands for Certified in Logistics, Transportation, and Distribution.
I have to admit, when I first saw the title of this manual, it sounded a bit dry.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, but reading through it, I realized this is essentially the hidden Bible of global logistics. I mean, it is the literal playbook for how multinational corporations try to mathematically predict the future.
That is exactly how you have to view it. And our roadmap for this deep dive is going to take us right into the heart of that playbook.
So where do we start?
Well, we'll explore the fundamental laws of predicting the future first, and the underlying forces that actually shape consumer demand.
The forces that make us buy things.
Exactly. Then we will look at the actual tools companies use. So both the human guessing techniques, which are just riddled with fascinating psychological quirks, and, the hard mathematical philosophies.
And we also need to look at the report cards, right? Because companies have to grade themselves.
Oh, absolutely. How do they score their own predictions to avoid catastrophic multi-million-dollar failures?
Which is huge. So whether you are a small business owner trying to figure out your inventory for next quarter, or you're just a curious consumer who wants to understand why your favorite brand of coffee is suddenly on a 6-month back order.
Which is so frustrating.
It is. But getting a grasp on the mechanics of forecasting completely changes how you view the modern world of shopping. You will just never look at a retail shelf the same way again.
So we should probably establish the absolute baseline here. Like, what is forecasting at its core?
Let's do it.
The manual defines it as the business function that attempts to predict sales and the use of products so they can be purchased or manufactured in appropriate quantities well in advance.
So it fundamentally boils down to risk management.
Exactly.
As a business, you are trying to prevent two very expensive, very painful scenarios. Scenario A is the overstock.
Ah, yes. The winter coats in July.
Right. Imagine you ordered 10,000 heavy winter coats in a year. We ended up having a historically mild winter. Now you have just burned a pile of cash buying inventory nobody wants.
And worse, you are wasting incredibly expensive warehouse space just keeping those coats out of the rain.
Which is brutal for profit margins. And then Scenario B is the stock out. That's the empty umbrella rack. You didn't order enough.
Yeah, and now you have frustrated customers, you lost the immediate sale, and you might have permanently lost market share to the competitor down the street who actually had umbrellas in stock.
So the scale at which companies try to prevent those two scenarios varies wildly based on their time horizons, right?
Yeah. The source material categorizes forecasting into 3 distinct timelines. First, you have long-term forecasting.
And that's what, like 3 or more years out?
Exactly. 3 or more years into the future. This is not about deciding how many blue shirts to put on a specific shelf next week. This is massive strategic facility planning.
Like an executive team sitting in a boardroom.
Right. Asking things like, do we need to build a new semiconductor manufacturing plant in Mexico? Or are we going to need a gargantuan new distribution center in Ohio?
Which makes sense because, you can't just snap your fingers and have a distribution center.
Not at all.
It takes years to get the regulatory zoning approval, acquire the land, negotiate with local governments, and physically pour the concrete. You are forced to guess what consumer demand will look like half a decade from now just to break ground today.
Precisely. Then you move down to medium-term forecasting. This is usually looking 1 to 2 years out.
So what falls under that umbrella?
This is where organizations handle their budgeting, their aggregate production planning, and massive labor decisions. Like, do we need to negotiate a multi-year contract extension with a major national trucking fleet?
Or like, do we need to hire 500 more warehouse workers for the upcoming calendar year?
Exactly. And finally, you have short-term forecasting, which is basically anything under a year. This is the nitty-gritty, day-to-day survival of a supply chain.
Like, what specific raw materials do we purchase this month? Or what forklift maintenance do we schedule for next Tuesday?
You got it.
So we have all these timelines, all these highly paid, dedicated professionals, and incredibly sophisticated software trying to get these numbers exactly right. But the source material explicitly states something that just blew my mind.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. It's the ultimate, undeniable paradox of this entire industry.
The manual just comes right out and admits it in plain text. Forecasts are always wrong. Always.
Always.
Like, wait, always.
Yeah, the future is inherently uncertain. Human beings, as consumers, are fundamentally unpredictable creatures.
I mean, even people who buy the exact same brand of toothpaste every single month for 10 years.
Right. They might suddenly decide to try a competitor because they saw a funny commercial.
Or they might buy it from a different store because they move.
Or they might buy 5 tubes because there was a 2-for-1 sale. You just cannot perfectly model the chaos of human impulse.
Wait, so if we know mathematically and philosophically that these forecasts are always going to be wrong, why on earth do companies spend millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours doing them?
It's a fair question. Like, why not just wait and see what people actually buy? And then make it. It feels a bit like driving a car down a winding mountain road by only looking in the rearview mirror. You're just wildly guessing where the road is going to curve next based on where you just were.
It does feel like that. But to answer your question about why we can't just sit back and wait and see, it entirely comes down to a concept called lead times.
Lead times.
Yeah. Imagine you are running a multinational company that manufactures smartphones. It might take 6 entire months to source the rare earth metals from mining operations, manufacture the delicate microchips in specialized fabrication plants, assemble the physical phones in Asia,
Load them into shipping containers. Sail them across the Pacific Ocean.
unload them at a congested port, put them on a freight train, and then finally load them onto a local delivery truck headed to a retail store.
Wow. Okay.
If a customer walks into a big box store today and says, "I'd like to buy your newest phone," you cannot look at them and say, "Fantastic, thank you for the order. I will have that ready for you in exactly 6 months."
Because they'll just go buy someone else's phone.
Exactly. You had to guess half a year ago that they would walk in today.
Okay, so the lead time forces the prediction. We literally have no choice but to stare into the rearview mirror and guess.
We do, but the text notes a massive industry-wide shift happening right now to try and mitigate this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, organizations realize how dangerous and inaccurate forecasting is, so they are actively trying to eliminate the need for it wherever possible. They are adopting lean techniques or make-to-order operational strategy.
We basically speed things up.
Right. The goal is to speed up their supply chains so drastically that they push what is known as the push-pull frontier further and further back into the manufacturing process.
The push-pull frontier. That's a great term. So that is the exact threshold in a supply chain where a company stops pushing products based on a forecasted, educated guess and starts pulling products through the system based on an actual confirmed customer order with real money attached to it.
That's a perfect summary. A classic, everyday example is a fast food burger joint.
Oh, how so? Well, the management team might use a forecast to guess how many boxes of frozen patties to buy from their supplier for the upcoming week. That is the push.
Okay.
But they don't actually drop the specific patty on the grill and cook the burger until you pull up to the drive-through window and order it. That is the pull.
Ah, I see. So by shortening their internal lead times, companies are trying to rely on actual concrete data rather than guesses.
Exactly. But for complex products or raw materials with incredibly long global lead times, forecasting is still the only way to survive.
So if we are forced to forecast, if we are chained to our cloudy crystal ball, we need to understand what actually causes demand to fluctuate, right?
Right, because it isn't just magic or terrible luck. There are specific measurable forces acting on the market at all times.
And the source material breaks this down beautifully into 5 distinct factors that affect demand.
Yeah, and if you can learn to decode these 5 signals, you can start to make sense of the overwhelming noise in your sales data.
Okay, so the 5 factors are trends, cycles, seasonality, promotions or internal drivers, and random variation. Start with trends. That seems the most obvious.
It is. The text defines a trend as a general upward or downward movement of a variable over a long period. This is a long-term structural shift in consumer behavior.
And it usually takes one of 2 visual shapes on a graph, right?
Yeah, it is either linear, which is just a steady, relatively straight line slowly climbing up, declining down, or staying totally flat.
Or it's exponential, where it skyrockets upward almost vertically, like a viral tech gadget that suddenly everyone has to have, or it completely craters overnight.
Exactly. And it is vital to remember that trends naturally change direction based on a product's life cycle. A highly successful new product starts with a steep, exciting upward trend, but eventually market saturation hits.
Right. Everyone who wants a smart refrigerator already has one.
And then the trend inevitably flattens out into a maturity phase.
Makes sense. Okay, the next 2 factors are cycles and seasonality. And I have to say, reading through the manual, these 2 seem incredibly easy to mix up.
Oh, people confuse them all the time.
Yeah, because they both involve demand going up and down in a wave pattern.
Which is why the text is very careful to draw a hard line between them. Seasonality is a predictable, repetitive pattern of demand that is tied to a calendar.
Obviously, we think of the literal 4 seasons, heavy winter coats in December, swimsuits in June.
Right, but seasonality can be monthly, weekly, daily, or even hourly. The Friday night dinner rush at a local restaurant is a deeply ingrained seasonal pattern.
Because the kitchen knows it is going to happen every single Friday at 6 p.m.
Exactly. You can set your watch by it. But a cycle is a completely different beast.
Okay, so how is a cycle different?
A cycle is a multi-year macroeconomic wave-like pattern. Think of massive global forces like economic recessions, housing booms, or periods of high inflation.
So a cycle might last 3 years, or it might drag on for an entire decade.
Right. And because it isn't tied to a specific predictable date on the calendar, a cycle is incredibly difficult to forecast.
I can imagine.
This is where forecasters are forced to look outside their own sales data and monitor external global drivers, specifically utilizing leading versus lagging indicators.
Okay, so a leading indicator is essentially the canary in the coal mine. It tells you what is about to happen to your industry before the impact actually hits your bottom line.
The manual provides a perfect example for this, actually. Government building permits.
Oh, right.
If the government issues a massive, unusual spike in new building permits this month, that is a powerful leading indicator. It tells you that in roughly 6 months, there's going to be a massive, unavoidable surge in demand for raw lumber, roofing materials, and skilled construction labor.
That makes total sense. Conversely, a lagging indicator just tells you what already happened in the broader economy.
Which is practically useless for predicting the future of your specific supply chain.
Right. Okay, so we have trends, cycles, and seasonality. The 4th factor is promotions, or internal drivers. This is fascinating because this is when a company artificially spikes its own demand.
And essentially confuses itself.
Yeah.
It happens constantly in the corporate world. Imagine the marketing department decides, completely without telling anyone, to run a massive weekend-only 50% off flash sale.
Demand is going to absolutely explode.
Obviously. But if the forecasters sitting in the logistics department aren't in constant communication with the marketing department,
they might look at that massive spike in the raw sales data next week and mistakenly think, wow, the natural organic trend for our product is exploding. We need to quadruple production.
when in reality it was just a temporary self-inflicted promotion.
This also brings up internal drivers like minimum quantity requirements, right?
Yes, exactly. Let's say a supplier tells a retailer, you only get our premium discount if you buy 1,000 units at a time.
So the retailer's logistics software is going to occasionally spit out these huge sporadic purchase orders for 1,000 units.
Yeah.
Not because the end consumer suddenly wants 1,000 units on a Tuesday.
Right, simply because the corporate buyer wanted the discount.
Those internal rules create artificial jagged noise in the data that doesn't reflect actual consumer desire.
It really does. And that leads us perfectly into the final factor, random or irregular variation.
I love the manual's definition of this. It essentially just shrugs and says it is, well, everything else.
Pretty much. Random variation is the unexplainable, unpredictable fluctuation left over after you have painstakingly removed the trend, the economic cycle, the calendar seasonality, and the marketing promotions.
So the ultimate goal of a professional forecaster is to mathematically strip away all those explainable factors from their data until the only thing left on the screen is pure random noise.
Exactly.
I like to picture random variation like the static on a car radio. Imagine you are driving out into the country, far away from the city, and the radio signal starts to degrade.
You hear the pops and hisses.
Right, the crackles of static. You can never predict exactly when a pop or a hiss is going to happen.
Yeah.
That is the random variation. But underneath all that irritating static, you can still clearly hear the melody of the song playing.
And the underlying melody is the trend and the seasonality.
Exactly. If you focus all your attention on trying to predict the static, you will drive yourself insane.
Yeah.
You have to learn to tune the static out and just listen to the music.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize the forecaster's dilemma. And the text connects this directly to a formal concept from statistical process control.
Oh, right. Common cause versus special cause.
Yeah. In process control, you have what is called common cause variation. That is normal expected fluctuation. Your radio static, it just exists.
And then you have special cause variation, which is a specific, identifiable external event that disrupted your system, like a hurricane or a flash sale.
Right. A forecaster's entire job is to hunt down and identify every possible special cause so that the only thing left in their historical data is the normal, mundane, bell curve common cause variation.
Okay, so now that we understand what actually shapes demand, we know the difference between the music and the static. How do organizations sit down and actually build a forecast?
Because reading this manual, it is very clear it isn't just one junior analyst staring at an Excel spreadsheet guessing numbers.
No, definitely not. The source material outlines a rigorous, multi-step forecasting process. But rather than just reading a list of steps, let's talk about the distinct phases a company has to go through, because the sequence here is critical.
It is. Before anyone even touches a calculator or opens a piece of software, the absolute first phase is framing the problem. What is the actual purpose of this forecast?
Like, are we a massive conglomerate trying to determine our overall global revenue for the next fiscal year to report to Wall Street?
Right. Or are we a regional logistics manager trying to figure out exactly how many blue size medium shirts we need to load onto a specific delivery truck next Tuesday?
The purpose dictates the entire methodology.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to one of the golden rules of forecasting that the text really hammers home. Aggregate forecasts are always more reliable than granular forecasts.
They're exponentially more reliable, right?
Oh, without a doubt. It is relatively easy for a clothing brand to predict how many total shirts they will sell across North America next year.
Because the random highs and lows of thousands of individual stores tend to cancel each other out in the grand total.
Right. But trying to predict exactly how many blue size medium shirts one specific store in a specific mall will sell on a specific Tuesday, the random variation is so loud at that granular level that your forecast is almost guaranteed to be wrong.
So you have to decide exactly what level of detail you actually need before you start. Once you've framed the problem and set your time horizon, you move to the next phase, which honestly feels almost too simple to be in a professional manual.
You're talking about visualizing the data.
Yes. The text emphasizes that before you do any math, you must visually map the historical data on a graph and just look at it with your human eyes.
It sounds elementary, but skipping visualization is how catastrophic errors happen. If you just stare at a spreadsheet containing thousands of rows of raw numbers, your brain cannot process the overarching pattern.
You will just miss the forest for the trees.
Exactly. But the second you map those same numbers onto a visual line graph, the human eye immediately recognizes if there is a massive seasonal wave happening every December, or if there is a sharp, steady upward trend over the last 3 years.
And the visual shape of the data completely dictates which mathematical formula you will use in the later phases.
Right.
Okay, so you have framed the problem, you have looked at the graph, now you have to choose your weapon. Are we going to use human judgment, or are we going to let the computer run the hard math?
Let's dive into human judgment first, which the manual categorizes as qualitative methods.
Qualitative methods, so those are generally reserved for situations where you simply have no historical data to rely on, right?
Yeah, the classic example is launching a revolutionary brand new product category. If you are the first company ever releasing a commercial virtual reality headset, you cannot look at past sales data. because the past does not exist.
So you are forced to rely on the subjective guesses of industry experts.
And whenever you rely on human guessing, you introduce the single biggest risk factor in all of supply chain management.
Bias.
Bias. The manual defines bias as a consistent deviation from the mean in one specific direction. The human is either consistently forecasting too high month after month or consistently forecasting too low.
And human bias is rarely accidental. There are deep psychological and financial incentives at play.
Oh, totally. Why would a seasoned professional intentionally bias a forecast?
Well, think about the incentive structure for a sales team. If I'm a regional sales manager, my year-end bonus, my ability to pay my mortgage, is usually tied to me beating my annual sales target.
Right.
If corporate asks me in January to forecast how much I'm going to sell this year, I am heavily financially incentivized to lowball that number. I will intentionally underestimate my forecast so that my official target is incredibly easy to hit.
I look like a hero in December and I get my bonus.
Exactly. It is a classic sandbagging strategy.
And it happens in reverse, too. Imagine an executive boardroom with a culture of aggressive, unrelenting, toxic optimism. The CEO only wants to hear good news.
Oh, that's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. In that environment, a sales manager might vastly overestimate their forecast, promising the moon, just to avoid looking like a pessimist who isn't a team player.
And in both scenarios, the sandbagger and the toxic optimist, the accuracy of the supply chain is completely destroyed. The factory either doesn't build enough product or they build way too much.
But the source material provides a really elegant little mathematical formula to try and neutralize this human bias.
Oh, the three numbers trick.
Yes. If you need a forecast from an expert, you never just ask them for one single number. You force them to give you three distinct numbers.
Right. You ask for their absolute wildly optimistic estimate, their apocalyptic pessimistic estimate, and what they genuinely believe is their most likely estimate.
You are forcing the human brain to consciously acknowledge the extreme best and worst case scenarios rather than just subconsciously leaning towards one.
And the mitigation formula weights the most likely scenario the heaviest, but it allows the extreme edges to mathematically pull the final average slightly.
The standard formula is the optimistic guess plus 4 times the most likely guess plus the pessimistic guess, with that entire sum divided by 6.
Let's run a mental exercise to see how that smooths out bias. Let's say my pessimistic worst-case guess is 10 units. My wildly optimistic best-case guess is 20 units. But I tell you my most likely realistic guess is 12 units.
Okay, so your most likely guess is really close to your pessimistic guess.
Right. I'm clearly biased toward being conservative.
Yeah.
So we take the formula, 20 the optimistic plus 4 times 12, which is 48.
Plus 10, the pessimistic, that equals 78.
We divide 78 by 6, and then the formula spits out 13. So even though I swore my most likely guess was 12, the math nudged the final official forecast up to 13 because it acknowledged my optimistic ceiling was so high.
It mathematically overrides your conservative bias.
It is a brilliant psychological trick for dealing with a single individual. But what if a corporation needs a massive strategic forecast and they need a consensus from an entire group of executives or external experts?
That is where the text introduces one of the most rigorous qualitative tools in existence, the Delphi method.
I found the section on the Delphi method absolutely fascinating. It reads more like psychological warfare than logistics.
It really does. It is essentially a multi-round, highly structured, strictly anonymous survey process.
Right, you gather a panel of experts, you ask them all for a forecast, you take all their answers, aggregate them, strip away all the names, and send the anonymous results back to the entire group.
And you say, here is what the group as a whole thinks. Look at this new information. Do you want to revise your initial guess?
You repeat these anonymous rounds over and over until the group mathematically converges on a consensus. But my immediate question when reading this was, why the strict anonymity?
Are highly paid executives really so sensitive that they can't just sit in a boardroom, drink coffee, and debate this face-to-face?
Right.
Well, the manual explicitly addresses this, and it highlights 2 devastating phenomena of human group psychology that basically ruin boardroom forecasting. The first is groupthink.
Oh, groupthink is so common.
It is. If you put 15 people in a boardroom, the highest-ranking person in the room, or simply the person with the loudest, most dominant, aggressive personality, will immediately state their opinion.
And the moment they do, a significant portion of the independent thinkers in the room will instantly abandon their own data and just nod along.
Either out of subconscious intimidation, a desire to conform, or fear of career retaliation. Anonymity completely strips that dominant personality of their power. The loudest voice is reduced to just one anonymous data point.
And what is this second psychological phenomenon the Delphi method prevents?
The stake in the ground mentality. Imagine a senior vice president stands up in front of all their peers in a meeting and boldly declares, "I have analyzed the market, and I believe sales will definitively increase by 20%.
They have publicly staked their ego and their professional reputation on that exact number.
Exactly. If 20 minutes later in the same meeting, a junior analyst presents overwhelming, undeniable evidence that sales are actually going to decrease,
That vice president is going to be incredibly resistant to changing their mind.
because to publicly admit they were completely wrong in front of their rivals causes a massive loss of face.
But if their initial 20% guess was submitted totally anonymously,
They can quietly look at the junior analyst's data, realize they were wrong, and drastically revise their estimate in round 2 without an ounce of embarrassment.
the Delphi method is just an incredible way to hack the human ego. But reading through the process, it sounds exhausting.
It is very time-consuming.
Surveying a panel of experts over and over is slow, it is subjective, and it is incredibly labor-intensive. If I'm a massive company like Amazon, I can't launch a multi-round anonymous survey every time a consumer buys a pack of toothbrushes.
Definitely not. At some point, you have to just hand this over to a computer.
Which brings us to quantitative methods.
Exactly. When a company has years and years of solid, reliable, historical sales data, human guessing becomes obsolete. They let the hard math take the wheel.
And the text divides mathematical forecasting into two distinct philosophical camps, right?
Yep.
Time series forecasting and associative forecasting.
Let's tackle time series first. The fundamental philosophical assumption behind any time series forecast is that whatever happened in the past is going to keep happening in the future.
You are taking historical data patterns and blindly projecting them forward. But before you let the software run the math, you have to execute a critical preparatory step that ties back to our visual graph.
Deseasonalizing the data.
Seasonalizing. Okay.
If you look at your graph and you see massive repeating seasonal spikes, you absolutely cannot run a standard time series forecast on that raw data. It will break the algorithm.
I want you to imagine a mental exercise to understand why deseasonalizing is mandatory. Imagine you own a company that manufactures snow shovels.
Okay, snow shovels.
If you look at your raw sales data from December, January, and February, you are going to see a massive, towering mountain of sales.
All right, because of winter.
Exactly. If you feed that raw winter data into a basic forecasting formula in March to try and predict your upcoming spring sales, well, the mathematical algorithm doesn't know what the concept of spring is.
It doesn't know what snow is.
Right. It just looks at a line going violently upward for 3 months, and it will confidently predict that in April, you are going to sell 1 trillion snow shovels.
The math is blind to context. It just projects the trajectory.
So you have to mathematically flatten that winter mountain before you can use the data. You calculate what the manual calls a seasonal index.
Without getting bogged down in the algebra, you basically figure out mathematically exactly how much bigger winter is than your boring yearly average.
Then you divide your winter data by that index, which artificially flattens the mountain.
And once your historical data looks like a flat, boring line, meaning you have successfully removed the seasons, then you can run your forecast on that flat line to see the true underlying year-over-year trend of your business.
Are we growing or are we shrinking?
Exactly. And this is crucial. Once the math generates the forecast for next year's flat line, you have to do the final step.
Reseasonalizing.
Yes. You take that flat, boring forecast for next January, and you multiply it back by your seasonal index to build the mountain back up into your final real-world prediction.
It is a vital, non-negotiable step to keep seasonal products from completely destroying your supply chain models.
Okay, so our data is deseasonalized. It is flat and ready for the math. The source material highlights 3 primary time series models.
Let me guess. The simple moving average, the weighted moving average, and exponential smoothing.
You got it. The simple moving average is exactly what it sounds like. You just take the demand from the last few periods, say the last 3 months, add them together, and divide by 3.
Then next month, you drop the oldest month's data, add the newest month's data, and do it again. It creates a slow rolling average.
The primary benefit of a simple moving average is that it aggressively smooths out that random radiostatic we talked about earlier.
Right, so if one random month had a weird, unexplainable dip in sales, averaging it with the 2 normal months hides the dip, preventing your supply chain from overreacting.
But the manual notes a fatal flaw with this method. It inherently lags behind reality.
Because if a massive new permanent upward trend starts today, a simple moving average is going to be incredibly slow to react.
Because the new data is being anchored down by the old lower data from 2 months ago.
Which is why forecasters often upgrade to a weighted moving average. This allows the human operator to tell the computer, hey, the data from yesterday is much more relevant than the data from 3 months ago.
So you apply a heavier mathematical weight to the most recent data, which helps the model react to new trends just a little bit faster.
But the real star of the time series show, the concept that text spends pages dissecting, is exponential smoothing.
Exponential smoothing is a brilliant formula because it abandons the clumsy idea of averaging a set number of past months altogether.
Okay, so what does it use instead?
It relies on just 3 simple inputs: the actual physical demand from the last period, the forecasted guess from the last period, and a single smoothing constant known as alpha.
When I was reading this section, all the algebraic formulas for exponential smoothing made my eyes cross. But I found the best way to understand the philosophy of the alpha constant is to compare it to adjusting the power steering sensitivity on a car.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The alpha constant is just a percentage weight represented as a decimal between 0 and 1.
Right, and it dictates entirely how much the organization wants to aggressively react to recent changes versus how much they want to trust their old, stable predictions.
So if you set your alpha very high, say 0.5, which is heavily weighting the most recent immediate demand, it is exactly like having a hypersensitive, twitchy steering wheel in a sports car.
The slightest twitch in yesterday's actual sales will jerk your entire forecast violently in a new direction.
You would intentionally want a high alpha if you were driving on a winding, unpredictable road. Think about the fast fashion industry.
Oh yeah, where the market is incredibly volatile. If a celebrity wears a specific jacket on Tuesday, you need your forecast to react violently on Wednesday so your factories start pumping out that jacket.
Exactly. But imagine the opposite scenario. If you were manufacturing something incredibly stable, like table salt or toilet paper,
You would set your alpha very low, say 0.05.
by doing this, you are telling the computer to basically ignore yesterday's actual demand and heavily weight your historical long-term forecast.
It's like having a very stiff, heavy steering wheel on a massive freight truck. You know your market is cruising on a long, straight highway.
If there is a sudden, tiny bump in sales on a Tuesday, it is probably just a pothole, just random variation, and you absolutely do not want to swerve your entire multi-million-dollar supply chain into the ditch by overreacting to it.
So the art of exponential smoothing isn't about memorizing the algebra. The software does the math. The true art is the human experience required to choose the exact right alpha constant for your specific industry's steering wheel.
Precisely. Now, all those time series models share one fatal assumption. They believe the past perfectly predicts the future.
But what happens if the past is completely irrelevant? What if the underlying structure of the market is shifting in a way that historical sales just cannot capture?
That is when you must abandon time series and switch to the second camp of quantitative forecasting, associative forecasting.
Also known as causal forecasting. This is where you tell the computer to completely ignore your past sales history.
Right. Instead, you look out into the broader world for external variables that you believe physically drive your sales.
The classic foundational method here is simple linear regression. This brings us right back to high school algebra. Y equals mx plus b.
Oh, algebra.
Yeah, the variable you are desperately trying to predict, let's use the text's example of your company's sales of roofing materials, is y, the dependent variable. And you are trying to find an independent variable x out in the world that acts as a reliable predictor.
So sticking with the roofing example, if the government releases data showing a massive spike in new housing starts, meaning they issued permits to build new neighborhoods, you can use that government data as your X.
Because you logically know that a few months after a foundation is poured, that house is going to need a roof.
Right, so housing starts are a concrete associative driver for roofing material sales. You mathematically map the historical relationship between the two, find the slope of that relationship, that's the M in the formula, and use the government data to confidently predict your future factory output.
It is an incredibly powerful tool for long-term forecasting at a massive aggregate level. But the manual issues a very stern, almost dire warning here for logistics professionals.
It does.
And I'm glad they did, because reading this, I was screaming at the book. We have all heard the golden rule of statistics. Correlation does not equal causation.
Exactly. Just because you observe two data lines moving up and down in perfect harmony on a chart does absolutely not mean one is physically causing the other.
It could be a complete, absurd coincidence.
A famous statistical joke is that ice cream sales and shark attacks perfectly correlate. They both spike at the exact same time every year.
But eating ice cream does not cause a shark to attack you.
No. The hidden variable driving both is just summer weather. If a forecaster builds an entire multi-million-dollar supply chain on a coincidence, the moment that coincidence inevitably breaks, the company is facing a catastrophic disaster.
Forecasters have to apply intense, rigorous human common sense when selecting their independent variables.
Without a doubt.
So let's step back and look at where we are. We have discussed our qualitative Delphi panels. We understand exponential smoothing and the alpha steering wheel. We know how to run linear regressions.
We have successfully generated a highly educated, mathematically sound number on a piece of paper.
But generating a number in a vacuum is the easy part. Delivering the actual physical goods based on that theoretical number is incredibly messy.
It really is.
How does this forecasted demand actually flow through the real-world physical channels of the economy?
This is where we leave the theoretical math behind and transition into the gritty reality of physical logistics. The text highlights how the philosophy of forecasting differs radically depending on which distribution channel you occupy.
Are you a business-to-business operation, known as B2B? Or are you a business-to-consumer operation, known as B2C?
Let's spend some time on this because a day in the life of a B2B forecaster looks completely alien compared to a B2C forecaster. Well, B2B sellers are often dealing in highly specialized, expensive, make-to-order products. Think of a company that manufactures industrial laser cutters for automotive factories. They are not trying to forecast how many finished laser cutters to build and leave sitting in a warehouse because they don't assemble the final product until a confirmed order arrives.
So what exactly are they forecasting then?
A B2B forecaster is primarily forecasting capacity. They are asking, do we have enough physical machine time on our factory floor? Do we need to hire specialized welders for the third quarter?
And most importantly, do we need to order highly specific, long lead time raw materials today just so we are ready to build when the inevitable order does finally come in?
Exactly. It is about preparing the potential for production, not holding finished inventory.
Meanwhile, B2C, particularly the retail sector, is a heavily make-to-stock environment.
Right. They have to manufacture the finished inventory, ship it across the ocean, and physically push it out onto store shelves long before the consumer ever decides to get off their couch and go shopping.
And a critical, counterintuitive insight from the manual is understanding where the forecasting actually happens in a massive retail environment.
Yeah, you would naturally assume that the general manager of a local neighborhood big box store is sitting in their back office, forecasting exactly how many packs of AAA batteries they need for their specific store next week.
But they usually aren't.
Because doing that violates the golden rule of aggregation. If you try to forecast at the individual store level, it is highly granular. The random variation, the radiostatic, is so loud that the store manager's forecast will be wildly inaccurate.
Instead, modern retail forecasting is almost entirely centralized at the distribution center, or DC level.
The massive regional distribution center aggregates the real-time point-of-sale data from maybe 100 different retail stores across 3 states.
By grouping all that data together into one massive pool, the random noise of individual shoppers completely cancels out.
The DC can create a highly accurate, incredibly stable regional forecast. The DC then uses that accurate aggregate forecast to place massive bulk orders with the upstream manufacturers.
But this structure, where the local store orders from the DC and the DC orders from the wholesaler, and the wholesaler orders from the factory, introduces one of the most famous, most destructive, and frankly terrifying phenomena in all of supply chain management.
The bullwhip effect.
The bullwhip effect. It is the nightmare scenario for any logistics professional.
The manual defines it formally as an extreme change in the supply position upstream generated by a very small change in demand downstream.
To visualize why they call it a bullwhip, imagine holding a real physical bullwhip in your hand. If you give your wrist a tiny 1-inch flick, that tiny flick represents the downstream consumer demand at the cash register.
And that tiny wave travels up the length of the whip, amplifying and growing in violent energy as it goes.
Until the very tip of the whip, which represents the upstream raw material supplier, is cracking wildly through the air in a massive 6-foot arc.
Let's put real concrete numbers to this so the listener can truly grasp the horror of it. Let's use the infamous toilet paper panic during the COVID-19 pandemic as a conceptual backdrop.
Oh, perfect example.
Let's say a retail store normally sells exactly 100 cases of toilet paper a week. Suddenly, there is a minor consumer panic, a tiny trend, and they sell 105 cases.
A minuscule 5% increase.
The local store manager notices the shelves look a bit bare and thinks, I don't want to stock out next week. So instead of ordering 105 cases to perfectly replenish, they buffer their order. They order 115 cases from the regional wholesaler just to be safe.
Okay, so the regional wholesaler receives an order for 115 cases. That is a 15% increase from their historical norm.
The wholesaler's forecasting software sees this 15% spike, panics, and factors in their own internal minimum lot size requirements and safety stock buffers.
So the wholesaler turns around and places an order with the national manufacturer for 140 cases.
The national manufacturer opens their dashboard and sees a massive 40% spike in demand. The executives freak out.
They authorize running a second shift at the factory, they pay exorbitant overtime to the workers, they charter emergency freight trucks, and they aggressively order enough raw paper pulp to produce 200 cases.
That tiny 5% blip at the local cash register has violently forced the upstream factory to literally double its production.
And the absolute worst part, the tragedy of the bullwhip effect, is that actual real-world consumer demand never actually reached 200 cases. It was only ever 105.
So now the panic subsides, and the entire multi-tiered supply chain is hopelessly choked with massive mountains of unwanted, expensive inventory that will sit in warehouses gathering dust for months.
And this devastating chain reaction happens simply because companies traditionally only communicate with each other via purchase orders.
Exactly. The factory never actually sees the real, raw consumer point-of-sale data. They only see the wholesaler's panicked, mathematically inflated purchase order.
So the obvious glaring solution, which the text heavily emphasizes, is a concept called CPFR, collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment.
If the lack of communication causes the bullwhip, why don't the local retailer, the regional wholesaler, and the massive manufacturer just log into one single shared computer dashboard that shows the raw, real-time point-of-sale data from the cash registers?
In theory, CPFR is the holy grail of supply chain management. Establishing a true one-number system that stretches across corporate boundaries eliminates the bullwhip entirely.
But the manual is very grounded in reality, noting that implementing CPFR involves massive logistical nightmares and, far more importantly, insurmountable trust hurdles.
Trust hurdles? You mean corporations don't naturally trust each other? Shocking.
Absolutely. Think about the risk. If a major national retail chain shares their raw, real-time sales data and inventory levels with a third-party supplier, that supplier now has intimate, highly confidential knowledge of the retailer's exact profit margins and vulnerabilities.
Right. And what happens if that supplier also happens to sell products to the retailer's biggest, most aggressive competitor?
Furthermore, in a CPFR arrangement, who actually legally owns the forecast? If the shared collaborative forecast ends up being wrong, who contractually has to eat the massive cost of the unsold inventory?
Getting rival, profit-driven corporations to collaborate transparently is incredibly difficult, even when the mathematical benefits of eliminating the bullwhip effect are universally understood.
So while the demand planners and executives are sitting in boardrooms arguing over CPFR contracts and data sharing agreements, what are the boots-on-the-ground logistics professionals actually doing to survive?
Because the text makes a brilliant point. The logistics professionals do not just passively sit back and accept whatever demand forecast is handed to them.
They have tools to actively shape that demand. They have levers they can pull to force the consumer's behavior to match the reality of their logistics capacity.
This concept is known as external balancing, or demand shaping. It is a vital survival tool.
Imagine a massive e-commerce fulfillment warehouse is currently operating at 100% capacity. The workers are exhausted, the loading docks are full, and they physically cannot handle processing another 1,000 shipments today.
The logistics team can use levers to fundamentally alter the customer's desires. The two primary levers at their disposal are price and lead time.
Let's talk about the lead time lever, because if you shop online, you see this exact tactic being deployed against you all the time.
You add some items to your digital cart, go to checkout, and the default shipping option is 2-day delivery for $10. But right below it, heavily highlighted, there's an option that says, choose 5 to 7 days slower shipping, and we will give you a $5 digital account credit.
That is logistics demand shaping in perfect action. The company knows their warehouse is overwhelmed right now, or they know mathematically that they can consolidate your small order with a massive future truckload next week to save a fortune on freight costs.
So they intentionally offer a financial incentive, the $5 bribe, to manipulate you into voluntarily accepting a much longer lead time.
The customer feels great because they think they got a clever deal, and the logistics network gets the vital breathing room it desperately needed to clear a physical bottleneck.
It is brilliant. They aren't predicting what you demand. They are actively changing what you demand and when you demand it to suit their physical reality.
They are managing the chaos, but inevitably the month ends. The sales are tallied by the accounting department. The actual concrete numbers roll in.
And this brings us to the final and perhaps most critical step of the entire forecasting process, keeping score.
We gathered our historical data, we deseasonalized our winter mountain, we ran our exponential smoothing with a carefully debated alpha constant.
We survived the bullwhip effect, we shipped the goods, and now we have to face the music, where we actually write.
The manual dedicates a very dense, significant section to measuring forecast accuracy, because an unmonitored, poor forecast doesn't just result in some leftover boxes in a corner, it causes catastrophic cascading logistics failures.
If your model consistently underestimates demand, you don't book enough freight trucks in advance.
Now you are forced to scramble and buy spot market transportation at the last possible minute, often paying triple the normal freight rate, destroying your profit margin on every item you sell.
So we have to measure forecast error. At its most basic elementary level, forecast error is just a simple subtraction problem. Actual demand minus forecasted demand, A minus F.
If the actual demand from consumers was 31 units and you confidently forecasted 34 units, your error is -3 units.
But the text introduces several highly specific mathematical metrics to track this error over time. The first one we need to talk about is MAD, mean absolute deviation.
Let's explain why the word absolute in that acronym is the most vital part of the concept.
This was a light bulb moment for me. I want the listener to really think about this math. Imagine in January, you forecast you will sell 100 units, but you actually sell 110. Your error is +10. You underforecasted.
Okay, +10.
Then in February, you forecast 100 units again, but this time you only sell 90. Your error is -10. You overforecasted. Now, wait, if I just average those two errors together, a +10 and a -10, they mathematically cancel each other out. My average error is literally 0.
Exactly. If you just used a simple average, you would proudly walk into your boss's office and say, my forecasting model is mathematically perfect. 0 average error.
When in reality, you are completely wrong by 10 units both months. And my physical supply chain suffered chaos both months. The warehouse was scrambling both times.
So to fix this illusion of perfection, forecasters use absolute values. In basic math, taking the absolute value strips away the positive or negative sign. It just measures the distance from 0.
So the absolute error for January is 10. The absolute error for February is 10. You add them up, get 20, divide by the 2 months, and your mean absolute deviation, your MAD, is 10 units per month.
It shows the true, undeniable magnitude of your bad guesses, regardless of which direction you messed.
MAD is a fantastic metric for understanding raw unit volume error. It tells the warehouse manager exactly how many physical boxes they need to worry about.
But there are other ways to look at this too, like MSE, or mean squared error.
Oh, right, MSE. How does that differ from AD?
Well, instead of just taking the absolute value, MSE actually squares each individual error before averaging them. So a miss of 10 becomes 100.
Wow, that really amplifies it.
It does, and that's the point. It penalizes large errors much more heavily than small ones. If you have one massive forecasting miss, MSE will highlight it aggressively, warning management that a major shock hit the supply chain.
But MAD and MSE both have a significant glaring flaw when you try to use them to compare different products across a massive corporate portfolio, don't they?
Right. If I'm a supply chain director and you come to me and say, hey, my MAD error for this product is 50 units, is that a good forecast or a terrible forecast?
I have no idea. If that product is a highly specialized piece of equipment and we only sell 100 units total in an entire year, an error of 50 units is a total unmitigated disaster. I was off by 50%, I should be fired.
But if that product is a cheap plastic toy and we sell 1 million units a year, an error of only 50 units is a miracle of modern mathematical forecasting.
To solve that inherent lack of context, forecasters use a sibling metric called MAPE, mean absolute percentage error.
Instead of telling you the error in raw, meaningless units, MAPE divides the absolute error by the actual demand, expressing it as a percentage.
So instead of saying we missed by 50 units, it tells you your error is 11%.
This is crucial for executive because it allows a manager to look at a massive digital dashboard containing thousands of completely different products and instantly see which forecasting models are failing.
Regardless of whether the product sells 10 units a year or 10,000 units a week.
MAD, MSE, and MAPE are great for judging past performance. But there is one more metric the source material treats as the ultimate real-time warning system. It is called the tracking signal.
The tracking signal is essentially the glowing red check engine light on the dashboard of your forecasting model.
The mathematical formula for the tracking signal is the algebraic sum of your forecast errors divided by your MAD.
Now, I want to highlight the word algebraic there. Unlike the absolute values we just talked about, the tracking signal does keep the positive and negative signs.
Yes, it intentionally keeps them, because while MAD measures the sheer magnitude of your error, the tracking signal is designed to measure bias.
Remember our discussion about human bias earlier? The danger of a model constantly guessing too high or constantly guessing too low.
The manual's explanation is very clinical, but I found the best way to visualize the tracking signal is to think about bowling bumpers at a bowling alley.
I love that analogy.
When you bowl, a perfect, flawless forecast is throwing the ball straight down the dead middle of the lane. But in the messy real world, the ball is always going to wobble left and right.
One month, you guess a little too high, the ball drifts slightly left. The next month, you guess a little too low, the ball drifts slightly right.
If you have a healthy, functioning forecasting model, the positive and negative errors naturally cancel each other out in the algebraic sum over time. Your tracking signal stays hovering right around zero. The ball wobbles, but it stays in the middle of the lane.
But consider what happens if your underlying forecasting model is fundamentally broken. Let's say the entire market shifted beneath your feet, and you are now consistently over-forecasting every single month.
The negative errors start to stack up. -10 in March, plus -5 in April, plus -15 in May. The algebraic sum begins to grow rapidly in one direction.
The bowling ball is drifting hard to the left, and it isn't coming back. Eventually, your tracking signal hits the bumper.
The manual notes that most organizations set their physical tracking signal bumpers at +4 or -4. If your tracking signal hits that number, the check engine light flashes on the software dashboard.
An alarm literally goes off. The system is screaming at the human operator. This isn't random radio static anymore. Your model is biased. You are consistently pulling the entire supply chain into the gutter.
And when that digital alarm goes off, the organization immediately pauses and enters a formal process called exception management.
Right. An exception to the rule has occurred. But the text is very clear on protocol. When the check engine light goes off, you do not just panic and throw out the entire mathematical model.
You don't burn down the spreadsheet. You work through a very methodical, calm checklist. First, you check for incredibly simple, stupid human errors. Did a junior clerk accidentally add an extra 0 in the data entry spreadsheet?
Garbage in, garbage out. If the raw math is correct, you check the departmental assumptions. Did the marketing team completely change their promotional schedule without bothering to email logistics?
And if the math is perfect and the assumptions haven't changed, then the forecaster has to physically look out the window at the messy real world.
Did a massive competitor just file for bankruptcy yesterday, suddenly flooding your retail stores with unexpected panic demand?
Did a freak hurricane wipe out a key supplier's factory? If a real-world, unpredictable event fundamentally broke your historical baseline, you have to step in and manually adjust the forecast to account for this new reality.
The forecast exception management process is designed to force massive organizations to react with human agility, rather than just blindly following a broken algorithm off a cliff.
In all of this intense effort, the mind-numbing math, the tracking signals, the constant exception management, the Delphi surveys, it all serves one ultimate unyielding purpose.
Survival.
It is about corporate survival in a brutally competitive global market. It is about ensuring that the physical logistics network has exactly enough capacity to deliver what the customer wants, exactly when they want it, without bankrupting the company in the process.
It is a monumental, almost impossible task. And we have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
We learned that the ultimate paradox of forecasting is that despite all the math, it is always going to be a little bit wrong.
We unpacked the forces that actually shape our behavior. from long-term macroeconomic trends to the unpredictable, chaotic static of random variation.
We explored the deeply psychological ways humans try to guess the future using anonymous Delphi panels, and the cold, mathematical ways computers do it using exponential smoothing and linear regressions.
We navigated the treacherous waters of the bullwhip effect.
And finally, we learned how supply chain professionals keep score, using absolute deviations, mean squared errors, and tracking signals to keep their predictions out of the gutter.
It is a complex, almost beautiful, invisible machine. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought that pushes a bit beyond the boundaries of the text.
Okay, what is it?
We discussed how modern organizations are trying to move away from forecasting entirely by utilizing make-to-order and lean techniques to push the pull frontier back.
Right, trying to speed everything up so they don't have to guess.
Consider this trajectory. As artificial intelligence becomes capable of predicting individual consumer behavior with terrifying, granular accuracy, and as physical technologies like industrial 3D printing and hyperlocal, fully automated micro-warehouses become the absolute norm.
Oh, wow. I see where you're going.
Will we eventually reach a tipping point where physical production and delivery are so instantaneous that the very concept of forecasting demand becomes a quaint relic of the past?
That's fascinating.
Will the future of the global supply chain be entirely 100% reactive, finally eliminating the need for the flawed crystal ball altogether?
That is a wild, almost sci-fi thought. Imagine a world entirely without overstocked warehouses, completely without stockouts, just perfect, instant mathematical equilibrium.
It's definitely something to mull over.
It really is. Until that day arrives, I want you to do something. The next time you are at a big box store and you reach your hand out for a product on the shelf, whether it is an umbrella right before a storm or a winter coat in July,
just think about it.
Yeah, take 1 second to recognize the immense strategic planning, the complex mathematical algorithms, the psychological guesswork, and the incredibly hard unseen work of the logistics professionals that ensured that exact item was sitting right there, right when you needed it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.